And I think everyone has made it successfully into our Zoom room. So hello, everybody. I am Christina Brewer. I'm the editorial director at Fountainhead Press. And I would first like to thank all of you for joining us today, both for your interest in this conversation and the thoughtful questions that you posed in your registration, which I've used actually to shape this discussion with Vershawn. And of course, my next thanks go to Vershawn Young himself for hosting this conversation, making the time. And many of you may be familiar already with Dr. Vey's work. He's the author or co-author of 9 books, and he's the current chair of the 4 Cs. I will note that I'm going to let Vershawn speak more about his background and experience and how it informs this project, because he will do a much more engaging job of it than I can. I also want to introduce Lindsay Rice. She's with our meeting today. She's the developmental editor for this text, and she will both monitor the chat today, and she will also show us the text and how it looks and performs in the digital environment, something I know everyone is always curious to see. When I looked at the questions you posted, the range and nuance of the questions made me realize that it probably will be important to host a couple more meetings in the spring term. So I just wanted to make a nod to that Vershawn has already agreed that we might benefit from ongoing conversation. One of the coolest things that we got requested for this meeting is a couple of professors asked if their students could join. You know, they wanted to put out the call to the students at large, and I thought that is so thrilling that students want to talk about this. And while this is a faculty-only event, I'm definitely going to cook up a student-centered event that Vershawn has also agreed to host. So I think that's really exciting. I wanted to start a little bit with how this book came about. It's actually the foundation of my first question for Vershawn. We're a small print-based company. And so over the last year, through our partnership with Top Hat and realizing we had to have a digital response, we have been busy completely reimagining our publishing model. At the same time, with COVID-19, with the killing of George Floyd, the protests, we had our authors, our reps, and people like yourselves reaching out to us to see if we had content to address the current moment. And while we were very busily adding relevant examples and updating our line and our incoming books with that, we realized we needed a dedicated text for a project like this. And the very first person I thought of was Vershawn Young. So at 6 p.m. one night, I thought, all right, I'm just going to send him an email. And I waited. And when I got up in the morning, I was so thrilled. I can't even tell you that I had an immediate affirmative response from Vershawn saying, yes, 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 let's do this thing. And so that kind of leads to my first question to you, Vershawn, which is, what were your thoughts when you got my email? And can you talk a little bit about how your background and experience made you answer so quickly and in the affirmative?
Thank you so much, Christina, for actually inviting me to participate in this project and to curate this book. I do want to slow down on that question about what my personal relationship is to the book, as well as the professional relationship. But first, I want to give what I have been calling a Black body acknowledgement that's in line with the Native and Indigenous Peoples Land Acknowledgement. But this Black body acknowledgement is an acknowledgement that I'm encouraging everyone to do in a similar fashion to the Native and Indigenous Peoples Land acknowledgements, in order to keep the importance of understanding Black and African American issues and concerns and other racialized issues in the forefront. So I was born in the USA, and I currently teach, live, and research in Ontario, Canada. My spirit and breath activate a Black male body, one that is part of a race that is disproportionately maligned, surveilled, policed, jailed, and murdered. I often can't breathe. As Black men, Eric Gardner and George Floyd said respectively on July 17th, 2014 and May 26th, 2020, before their lives were snuffed out by excessive police force, actually brutality. I make a commitment here today to help make breathing space for Black peoples across the globe as we move throughout white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, as Bell Hooks puts it. In other words, I am here offering a Black body acknowledgement in order to encourage all of my colleagues and peers and friends to also remember Blackness. So I have been concerned about and thinking about issues of racial justice and social justice since I was a kid. I grew up in Chicago in the housing projects with a single mother who went back to school later in life while I was still just a kid in elementary school. And she had active interest in Black studies, sociology, and nursing. She is a nurse. And all of those books that she would bring home from the university as she was reading with names that people were probably no longer familiar with, but Black scholars, and we would read those books. And as my mother would be cooking in the kitchen, she would have her books spread out on the table and have each of her kids take turns reading to her what her lesson was so that she could keep up with her university studies. And so that impacted me to a great degree because of the content of what I was reading had to deal with the lived experiences of Black people. And when I went to the university, I studied English and became an English teacher and specialized in African-American literature and rhetoric as an undergrad, and then went to a graduate school and continued those studies in cultural studies, composition, rhetoric, writing, etc. Recently, I have been invited to talk to faculties, to talk to organizations about equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, and also what is really behind the protests against anti-Black sentiment. And I have been stunned, to be quite frank with you, Christina, full self-disclosure. I have been stunned at the lack of awareness and the lack of what I'm calling real, genuine insight into the social justice issues. It's not that people are against the social justice issues or against anti-Black protests. They're actually interested in them, the people that I'm talking about. They just don't have a lot of information. And the reason why I'm stunned by that is because when I went to college in the mid-1990s or the late 1990s, diversity courses were required. So my peers and colleagues and friends who are of the same age as I am had to have taken diversity, equity, and inclusion, some kind of course at the university that would give them insight into these social perils. So I'm stunned at this late date that people really don't have a grounding in the issues or the discourses and conversations that inform the protests against anti-Black sentiment. And I'm stunned because you can just name the number of Black men and women who have died in police custody under questionable circumstances. Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Philando Castillo, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, and so forth. So as I was having these series of conversations and hearing that people actually didn't have the information or were not actually clued into the discourse, startled me. It raised a significant level and measure of concern, but it also put my feet to the fire to say, maybe I should try to do something about this to fill this gap and this need, at least to give people insight into some of the conversations about social justice as they pertain to race. So when I got your email, and there's a time difference because you're in California, or I'm sorry, on the West, right? So you're in the Pacific time zone, which is about 3 hours ahead of me. So I obviously would have gotten your email before you woke up. And I was thrilled because I was like, here's the perfect opportunity. Partner with the press, bring the conversations together and introduce them to interested educators and interested public want to get grounded in at least the discourse about the topics surrounding racial justice and anti-racism, particularly as it pertains to Black identity in America and Canada.
Yes, for sure. You know, I think one of the things that pleased me as I read people's questions, and certainly they were responding to the invitation I sent and the topics I promised, which were having productive conversations with students about current social movements, helping us all understand historical conversations about race, protests, identity, policing. That's what brought everyone to the room. One of the things I also said was to share insights about educating students and ourselves, right? So I can offer that building this reader with Vershawn has actually really been generative and working through a conversation in a very progressive manner that we hope you'll find effective. And I'll just articulate that what we have worked our way through is a 5-unit reader that shapes an overall conversation that roughly moves in the following way. How George Floyd catalyzed a national and global response to a long and ongoing conversation about race in America. We then provide a historical overview of Black voices and activism, which sort of shows the longevity of this ask in culture. Appropriate uses of the N-word. This is a hot topic that people, wonder about a lot. And we thought, let's do it. Well, Vershawn said, let's do it. Decolonizing rhetoric, right? We want to look at standard American English, how language and identity intersect, and then where we go next, right? Ending with where we go next. So I think the framework of the text itself really responds inherently to the questions you posed to me in your registration forms. And I thought before we dig in deeper, it might be really useful to have Lindsay show us just the structure and content of the book. We'll do like a little mini preview so that you're not operating in a space where you can't visualize what we're doing here in these 5 units. So I'm going to turn to Lindsay for that, and then we will revisit. So don't think that everything she shows you now will be all we show you. We will dig in with a little deeper look at how the readings actually function, what the stable structural elements will be, but I especially want to focus on the structure of the book itself and how it progresses. So Lindsay, can you go ahead and share screen, and we'll give everyone a sense of the reader that Vershawn has curated. You're muted, Lindsay. I'm going to make sure you take yourself off mute.
Of course I am. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to show you the overall structure of the text. As Christina said, the book has 5 units. This is the content tree for the text. As you'll see, each unit begins with an introduction. Over here is a preview of the introduction. for Unit 1. Each introduction features original art from Antonia Rupert. There will be 6 pieces of Antonia's art in the book. There are also 8 primary readings in each unit. And each reading also has additional resources or videos to further the conversation initiated with each primary reading. Each unit also ends with an assignment. And so this is the framework that exists for each unit. As a note, we do have some original commissioned pieces in this reader. They primarily appear in Unit 5. However, there are 1 or 2 pieces throughout the book. So those original pieces will be in Unit 5, and they're being published for the first time in this text.
Okay. So what you just saw is the book in our partner platform, Top Hat. And it has a lot of very cool things we can do, which again, we're going to show you a greater exploration of the images, the videos, the way we can make this interactive and multimodal in just a little bit. But I thought showing you the units and as they progress. So Unit 1 discusses George Floyd as a cultural tipping point. And then as Lindsay said, there are 8 readings that expand this conversation. So Vershawn, when you were putting together Unit 1, some of the questions we were getting in the registration forms were, how can I help students understand systemic racism and accept white privilege as real, and especially if they're unwilling to discuss it or, feeling nervous about having the conversations, and how can I have productive conversations about the current social movements in my classroom? So can you talk a little bit about what Unit 1 does and what we're seeking to accomplish in using George Floyd as our focal point?
Yes. So Unit 1 really is a grounding unit in order to understand what has been behind the recent important protests against anti-Black racism. And George Floyd serves as what we might understand from Malcolm Gladwell's important book as a tipping point, a cultural tipping point. That is to say, before George Floyd, as I mentioned earlier in my opening comments, there have been a number of suspicious deaths of Black people at the hands of while they were in police custody. But George Floyd served as a very significant moment in which people could no longer ignore or stand by and accept the kind of brutality that people have been saying occurs against African Americans and Black people in North America. So Unit 1 asked the question, why is George Floyd a tipping point? Or another way to say it, how has George Floyd served as a catalyst? And it goes back into a series of conversations that preceded George Floyd. For example, Colin Kaepernick, there is an essay in Unit 1 that brings people's attention to the relatedness between what Colin Kaepernick was kneeling for and the injustice that George Floyd experienced. And there are a number of other essays in that unit that grounds it, that gives a foundation, at least a contemporary foundation, as to why we're in this particular moment. And the unit further tries to tease out what the why protest is necessary. Many people have asked, and I think in some ways quite sincerely, other ways not so sincerely, well, is protest the best method to bring attention to these longstanding issues and concerns? Well, this unit says, well, here's the purpose of protests. Here's why protests are important. It helps us to define what a protest is, which really, in its simplest terms, is going against something that is wrong or bringing attention to it or not following the routine or the status quo when things are wrong, and trying to disrupt the normalization of negative social factors. That's what protests are used for. And this unit, in addition to helping to bring together some conversations that have been going on since at least 2015, with some of the deaths, as I mentioned before, the killings of Black people, the protests that have been intermittent, the protests that we have seen in the sports arena by Black and other athletes. So the unit gives us a consolidation to say, this is why this is happening, and also to raise questions for readers about their relationship and their role in those conversations.
Right. I should probably ask the question, whether viewers, you can wave to me. We sort of discussed whether we should leave the content tree up while speaking or not. Do you all want to see the reading titles? I want to invite everyone also that our webpage for this book, I see that Katomira posted it in our chat. It will also show you the framework for the text and the table of contents. So I want to reassure everyone that we are going to give you a deep dive into the book. I know that was kind of like what was that? Show me those readings again. So I promise we're going to have Lindsay spend about 10 minutes giving you a slower walkthrough and show you the components of the reader. But I really appreciate seeing all this interest pop up in the chat. I think that Sarah Cooper asks a provocative question that I feel like maybe I will toss at you because it affects both Unit 2 and Unit 1. Sarah Cooper has asked, would the detractors of protest prefer armed insurrection? So, I mean, this is a very tricky area we find ourselves in, which is one of the reasons that we do move into protests and policing in Unit 2, and we very specifically have conversation about, you know, why do riots happen? What is the meaning behind riots? And, you know, again, this violence that we are seeing in society. So do you want to talk a little bit about, you know, Unit 2 as it pertains to both Sarah's question and just why? I think Unit 2, we talked a lot about the things we think students will be talking about, right? What they will be curious about, you know, and policing and the protests and the riots, you know, it's all married in ways that I think Unit 2 does a great job of explaining. Can you speak to that a little bit, Vershawn?
Yeah, first the question. I believe the question is, I take it as being rhetorical. That is, the answer is already obvious, that the detractors would not want armed insurrection, right? But let me say something about why I said earlier that those detractors, or the people who ask the question about the feasibility of protests, are both, some are sincere and some are insincere, and why we have to deal with both. As educators, we can't pick and choose the ideologies or the mindsets that students come to our classrooms with, and we're responsible for them all. So, well, I may really privilege and want to have students in my class who are social justice activists, who have a deep and rich understanding of social and cultural histories as they pertain to race, gender, class, sexuality, etc. I don't have that luxury because we live in a diverse society where people have different kinds of views. And that view about seeing protests as being irresponsible or ineffective is a real ideological standpoint that many people have. The beauty for an educator in having a book like this, and why I was eager to curate it, is because it sort of takes the onus off of the teacher to a certain degree, not fully, but to a certain degree, and say, this is a book or project that is helping us all to have this conversation, right? So questions about protests can be asked. And then even that question on whether it's effective or not, or whether one would prefer armed insurrection or not, can be asked in relation to the readings. What do the readings say about it, right? This question has been dealt with before. What are the various perspectives about it? In one way, there's not going to be a deep sounding down of the issue. There's going to be an introduction, a conversation, and interest piqued in these topics. In Unit 2, the theme is socially just policing and racial justice. And what Unit 2 tries to do is to chart not the longue durée or the entire history of calls for social justice. We know that Black people have been making calls for social justice in America since 1619, and that there have been calls to legislators, et cetera, by free Black people in the States, even during the enslavement period. But this unit sort of begins its track in the late 1950s and 60s, and sort of deals with conversations that James Baldwin was having, for instance, about racial justice, and then sort of charts the way to other speakers of racial justice. It also tries to bring back into our cultural memory, to the forefront of our understanding, some deep concerns that we had a few years ago that were easily dismissed. Let me give you an example. One of the articles that I wanted to include was and that it is included, is a news article about the North Miami-Dade County Police Department that was using Black men's mugshots for target practice. So when they would go on the shooting range, they didn't have that Black or white outline of a body to practice shooting at mass, which is where police are trained to shoot right at center mass. They had Black men on the wall. And their response when they were criticized about it was that these were the majority of the mugshots that we had. And so we didn't have any sort of racist tendencies. We don't see it as white supremacist or racist to have these Black men's pictures on the wall. It's just target practice. Well, now that we're at a moment to look at why that was ideologically and culturally insensitive at best, racist at worst, we can have a better conversation and ask, how does that contribute? Having target practice towards Black men's mugshots, how does that contribute to police brutality and excessive force against Black men? That particular article is coupled with one where a white police officer shoots his plainclothes Black police officer colleague. So, and what's so interesting about this, I'm smiling because it seems, some of these things seem obvious to me that this is wrong. To others, it's not so obvious. But what's interesting in that story is that there were already 3 police officers on the scene, 3 differently raced police officers, majority white. The Black police officer was coming to aid these 3 police officers. And then the 4th one approached and shot the Black police officer. So without asking any questions, he wasn't behaving in a way that was erratic. He was behaving in a professional manner. But this unit raises the questions about why Black people tend to see police or policing in fearful ways, not necessarily always threatening, but fearful of our lives, right? Why is it that there's a difference when it's a person of color, particularly Black, where we both fear and need the police, fear and want them, while other people believe only or simply that the police is there to protect and serve? But we live every day thinking the police are here to protect and serve me, but how do I ensure that happens and I'm not murdered? So that is the kind of conversation that Unit 2 invites students and others to have. But it places it not just about policing, because policing is only one aspect. It places it in the context of social justice overall, calls for social justice. This helps us to appreciate how we can then get to the classroom, how we can get to the boardroom, how we can then get to the White House, because calls for social justice are not just about policing, but about a just, equitable framework for us to adopt and move with them in society.
That's, I'm getting, again, I love this chat stream, this group. You guys are right up my alley, I have to say. I was going to say, when you said, I'm smiling or my face is this, Laura said that Zoom needs a WTF reaction. So some of these things you're sharing, people are going, hey, no kidding, this is outrageous. Raising this kind of awareness is really the mission of this book. And other things that Vershawn and I have talked about is that we do see some conversations emerging. Like, we all know that in the classroom, we've had some hot button issues like gun control, things that we've been seeing students want to write and engage. And maybe we could argue because they think it will be easy, but we think there's going to be really prolonged and deep discussion about the protests, about the idea of defunding the police. So we take some time to unpack that with additional readings and viewpoints. And we provide historical context for how policing is related to why protests become riots or become violent. I think this is going to be really, really engaging for students, because these are the questions I think they're asking about the protests. So we're very excited about the movement we make in Unit 2. I think that also, as we turn our attention to cultural language and things in Unit 3, one of the questions I had specifically about our unit on appropriate uses of the N-word, Vershawn, are how do we do justice to acknowledging the socially violent powers of the N-word in the classroom, especially when our students read texts that include it and its variants? How do we prevent our rightful offense at the word and not cultivate censorship on syllabi, etc.? This seems like a question built for our conversations, doesn't it, Vershawn?
Yes, it does. Here's the thing. The N-word is a very controversial and hot topic. But some things about the N-word need to be settled from my perspective. And the unit doesn't try to settle it as much as it opens the conversation up, but it doesn't do two things. It doesn't say that the N-word is off limits for everybody, that it cannot be used at all. The unit does not do that. That's why the title is the N-word: Cultural and Appropriate Cultural and Educational Uses. The other thing is it doesn't put Black people under erasure. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So the first thing about the appropriate cultural and educational uses, this unit gives at least 3 readings that help people to understand the diverse connotations of the N-word as it is used in African-American culture among Black people. So there's Gloria Naylor's essay that first appeared in the New York Times in 1986. There's Geneva Smitherman's linguistic study of the uses of the N-word. There is Randall Kennedy's essay on the history of the N-word from 1619 to the turn of the most recent century, 2000. These conversations, I don't believe that the majority of white people have the opportunity or the advantage to understand. Most white people don't grow up in Black culture. I mean, in a Black household and in Black neighborhoods and Black communities where the N-word is used in multifarious positive ways. This unit outlines those in readings. There's what people are most concerned about when it comes to the N-word is its derogatory use, right, as a ethnic and racial slur. Well, that is not the way in which, or the only way in which the N-word is used in Black culture. There, as I mentioned, there are 6 or 7 other different connotations. And so instead of reducing the word to its one derogatory understanding that was developed during slavery as an epithet against Black people, it actually does not privilege whiteness in that way. To only think about the N-word as a derogatory racial slur is really to privilege white supremacy because that's how it developed. There was a history before it, and there is a rich cultural history after that derogatory manifestation of the N-word. And so we must have that conversation. Now, the other conversation around the N-word that we need to have is how do teachers approach it? Given the fact that there are multiple sensitivities that students come with. And I think that it's a wonderful sensitivity to come in the classroom and say that there is a racial slur that is absolutely off limits. We know about it. It has done extreme damage to people and we refuse to use it. That is great, but it is not the end, all right? That's a starting point. That's where we should start with that understanding. And so this unit also helps teachers to understand how they can use their agency, their academic freedom, and sort of teach literature, text, and cultural studies about the N-word without doing that damage. So one of the examples of doing that is, I use my own example in my classroom. As I study Black rhetoric and African American literature and performance, we regularly encounter the N-word. So the first thing that I do is I don't even talk about the N-word. I just talk that this class is about, we'll have some sensitive topics. And those controversial topics, when we get to them, the plans will be outlined to keep everybody safe and to keep the environment a safe one. That's very important to do up front in general, establishing a safe teaching and learning environment. When we get to the N-word in particular, I often ask students to read a selection first and then ask them to respond. What trepidations did they have? What concerns did they have? And that invites, and I don't mention the N-word at all, but most of them write about encountering the N-word. And then we are able to have that conversation. And I will say, what ways were the N-word used in this reading? And then then I'll have Geneva Smitherman or Gloria Naylor or Randall Kennedy's essay and say, here are the 6 or 7 other different ways other than that derogatory way that it's used. Can you identify the ways in which the N-word was used in this particular text by these African-American or Black characters or authors? And students are amazed to see, oh, it is not a racial epithet in this context. But many of them still feel trepidatious about uttering it. So here's another lesson that the unit tries to elucidate. Students can, in their own agency, can repeat the word in print in my classroom. Some teachers will ask students to only say the N word when they see it in print. I think that's fine, and I think that's that each teacher's classroom's approach, as long as people are safe and the conversation is courageous. But my students are allowed to say the N word in a quote or in a reading, right? Or they can say the N word depending on their level of comfort. Like they would replace a version of the N word with just that euphemistic saying N word. But what they can't do is ignore it. They can't skip over it as if it's not there. They can't say, in walked Vershawn Young and his Black brother said, hey, what's up? And then they just cut the word out. They can't do that. They either have to say the N word, they have to quote it. They cannot put Black people under erasure. They cannot put that Black connotation under erasure. They have to deal with it. That's one of the things that has happened in our culture and society. There's been a trade-off with Black progress, and that is to say Black people are relegated to their homes and communities and not the public. We're put under erasure. In public, our Black expressive cultures, ways of speaking, ways of behaving are put under erasure in public. And so this is also a way to say, no, Blackness and Black culture cannot be put under erasure. It needs to be dealt with. We have to, in order to really understand and not be willfully ignorant or not cultivate racial ignorance, we need to deal with what's in front of us. And one way is for you not to ignore that there is a controversial word in this text. And that's why we need to deal with it and unpack it.
You know, this is, I feel like this section will be very important for demystifying and having this conversation. And it absolutely is married to the Decolonizing Rhetoric chapter. But I am going to say, one thing I noticed in the questions were that these were the kind of complex questions. I'm seeing questions in the chat that need to be responded to. The Decolonizing Rhetoric, basically all of these nuanced rhetorical questions that I saw from all of you, that is going to be the subject of a dedicated conversation that I mentioned early on. But I need to turn over to show. We're going to talk, maybe finishing with the original pieces in Unit 5. I think we're going to run out of time, and I need to make sure that everybody gets to get a good, healthy preview of the text itself. So I am going to say we'll continue to have this conversation about 4 and 5, but first turn to Lindsay to show us a little bit more about the text and maybe slow down over that table of contents so that you guys can see the readings that are there, but also we have structural elements that are worth pointing out to you, and I think you'll get a much better sense of the text. And I want to thank Sarah Hancock, because when you posted about Rudy Francisco's video poem, what's exciting about the demonstration that Lindsay and I have prepared for this meeting is that we have included poetry as social action in this book. And we may be putting your suggestion as further reading, but it's going to be one of the things we show you today. So Lindsay, let's go ahead and do a deeper dive into the book itself.
Okay, so I'll begin by showing the Unit 1 introduction, which I kind of breezed past last time. This does have that original art that I mentioned. It also has photos from protests in 2020. Throughout the introduction, all introductions will have both the original art and current photos from 2020. At the end of each introduction are 2 pedagogical elements. One of them is called the big questions. These are 3 to 4 questions that students can consider as they read an entire unit. The second is called KWLD, or what are things that you want to know, or that you know already coming in, that you want to know, that you've learned, and that you want to discuss once you've finished reading the unit. These 2 elements are at the conclusion of all 5 unit introductions. And so they prepare students for what framework to keep in mind as they read all 8 selections for each unit. Now I'm going to turn to a reading to give you an idea of what the readings look like and the structure that guides each reading. So at the beginning of each reading is an element called the before reading. This is a section that provides introductory material and context for the reading that follows. This reading, you will see that this reading is a New York Times Visual Investigations video and article on George Floyd's death. You'll notice that we have a banner above the video. This is a explicit content warning that we display for any videos that have explicit language or that have content that viewers might find disturbing. So it is an element that's repeated throughout the book as well. At the end of every single reading is a furthering the conversation section. This has been alluded to a few times by both Vershawn and Christina, but this is a way that we are providing additional links and videos that will be directly embedded so that the conversation that's initiated by the original reading is extended. There are roughly 1 to 4 links or resources at the end of each reading to help you format that conversation. So we've heard a lot from faculty and students both before this conversation and throughout this conversation about protests and policing. I'm going to show you an example of one of the readings that we do have in Unit 2. Okay, so this reading is unique in the sense that it has subheads. So what I'm going to do is show you really quickly one of the perks of Top Hat. So all the subheads in a reading are clickable, they're linkable, they're hyperlinked. What that means is that if you're in the classroom and you want to talk about specifically how media portrayal betrays issues that are taking place about, in protests, you can click on this link and it will push you directly to that section. This is a way that you can have students go directly to sections that you want them to review or discuss with them. What I am in right now is the full screen mode, and this is what emulates the student experience. And so Top Hat also has note-taking capabilities. This is something that you and your students can both take advantage of. I will say that all notes that are taken in Top Hat are visible only to the note taker. So any notes you take in preparation for a class won't be visible by students, and any notes taken by students as they prepare for class won't be visible to you. There are 3 different ways to take notes in Top Hat. So you can highlight text to take any note. And if you click on the leftmost button, you'll be able to mark it as important, and that highlights it green for you. If you were to highlight it and click on the face, that would mark it as red. That's maybe something that you want to follow up on. And if you wanted to insert a note, a text note, or a bookmark, you would click on the bookmark, and that actually creates a hyperlinked text note that you can come back to. So you can say, this is my note, and you can say finish, and that creates a link that you can return to later when you have finished the reading and you need to return to it. So you'll see that, different from the first reading, this furthering the conversation is 2 videos rather than text links out. So with videos in Top Hat, we can link to YouTube or Vimeo videos, embed them directly within the text so students don't have to leave their textbook in order to watch videos. This is really important in this book because we have created a very digital rich book. There's a lot of links, there's a lot of videos. And so within the text, you can hit play and you can play it immediately from the text. Biggest benefit of that is that by playing it directly in the text, it's an ad-free experience. Students will not face any ads from YouTube whenever they're reviewing these videos within the text. I did see a question in the chat about seeing the unit's assignment, the end of unit assignment in a bit more detail. So I will quickly show the Unit 1 assignment. This is an assignment. Each assignment is different at the end of each unit, and it does call in to context the different readings that we have used throughout the unit. And some of them might have students working in groups. They might have students doing like a speech assignment. They're all going to be a little bit different. But here is a quick overview of that. And I do want to show you, as Christina mentioned, the poetry selections. So what is unique about the poetry selections is that we have made an effort to make this book very multimodal. We have interviews, we have essays and news articles, we have videos, there are spoken word performances, and there's poetry. We have actually provided 2 selections, and we use them in the protest and social justice unit to talk about how protest can be a form of political action. So we have both poems printed in full. With each poem, we have paired it with a recording of the poet who is doing a performance of their art, so students can both read it and listen to it. In the Furthering the Conversation for this piece, we have interviews with Black women poets who discuss how they are part of the new activist movement in 2020, and links to additional poetry resources. Now, I'm showing you this very specifically because Top Hat is a highly customizable platform. And so, for example, say you have an additional poem that you want to show your students, an additional video you want to show your students that goes with any of these readings. All you have to do is add it. You can add it, you can customize it, and you can customize it to your students, to the conversations you're already having in class as you read this book. Another thing that I want to quickly draw your attention to as I finish up about how customizable Top Hat is that you'll see as I scroll through this table of contents that there are checkboxes next to every single item in the table of contents. And what that means is that even though we've ordered the 8 readings within each unit to be in a very cohesive, progressive narrative that extends through the entire text, if you want to, the platform allows you the latitude to actually select and assign readings as you wish. So you can select to assign specific readings rather than assigning all 8. So for example, I could say I want to assign poetry selections and Confederate Monument, and that is a way that I can say these are the 2 things I want to currently assign. Any of us here at Fountainhead are happy to answer questions at a later date about how to modify the text in Top Hat. And I will say that the book is available as an ebook as well. So while the ebook won't be quite as elegant as the Top Hat presentation is, it will be in an e-reader platform called Perusal, which, as we understand, means that it can be embedded directly into your LMS. So that might be an attractive option as well. And so now I would like to turn it over to Vershawn quickly to talk about those original pieces we discussed in just a minute or 2, so everybody has an idea of what those look like.
Yes, and stay hovering here because I want to make sure, because we are only 6 minutes, I knew this would be a very fast hour, and I want to make sure that I answer a couple of questions about the book itself that came up in the chat while Lindsay was demoing. First, thank you for your compliments on the selections. We have really thought these things through and spent a lot of time putting it all in one place for you, including those extending the conversation sections, and we hope that makes it very easy. So I want to reinforce that Top Hat, this is Top Hat's delivery, and it's the one we highly recommend. All elements of this book meet both accessibility standards, but also it was very important to both Vershawn and I that the price point of this book be accessible. So the price to students for the edition in Top Hat will be $30. That includes use of the platform. So that Lindsay, I need you to monitor the chat now. There might be additional, but I want to stress that that is an amazing thing to get the functionality of the platform. You do have to work with your Fountainhead rep or Top Hat to get set up, but really it's ready to go. You can link to it from your LMS. You can integrate your work, your grades, if you assign participation or you build discussion questions. But this is another thing that we can build on in the future. But I want you to know that the book is ready for spring. It's ready to adopt in Top Hat, and it will be ready to adopt as an ebook. But as Lindsay said, it will not be as elegant in an ebook. The hyperlinks will be there, but it will take your students outside the text, right? We can no longer promise the YouTubes are commercial free and so forth. That said, our price to the ebook hosting platforms will be $20, which means that will be $26 or $27 to your students. So again, an incredibly low price for this text. And now I would, for the few minutes we have left, we're just down to 4 minutes. Lindsay, are there any questions in the chat about information people might need to know before they part this meeting?
Yes, to a few people's responses who are asking about desk copies or have particular questions about Top Hat's interfacing with their LMS or any other specific questions about the e-reader options, I would suggest that you reach out to our customer service department, where we will put you in contact with somebody in your area who can help you with those questions. So that would be customerservice@fountainheadpress.com. And I will put that email in the chat as well.
And we will have digital desk copies available, and we have been recording this meeting, which will be hosted on the book site. I want to circle back to say that our conversation about rhetoric, the N-word, and decolonizing rhetoric, that will very specifically be the subject of a second meeting that I host, and you will receive invites to that. And I'm sorry we couldn't really follow through with them today. I do want to turn the last couple minutes over to you, Vershawn, to both talk about just final parting words of wisdom regarding using this book, and also some of our original essays that we have in the text in Unit 5, because I think that's something that makes this book very special, is the pieces specifically commissioned for where we go next.
Yes, so Unit 5 really points us towards anti-racist activism, anti-racist consciousness, and how to be allies in social justice. And there are original pieces by Washonda Rivera of Northwestern University, who's writing about Christian responsibility and anti-racist activism, and why religion should not be a barrier to promoting social justice. Christopher Taylor has written and coined a new term, the racial conduit, which is a furthering of allyship with people of color in a different way. He's trying to push what it means to be an ally. And of course, my dear friend and colleague, Frankie Condon, has written a piece specifically addressed to white liberals and their role in the anti-racist struggle. And most of those are located towards the end of the unit, in Unit 5, in order to help us to see how these conversations can take us into active places and have active roles in social justice.
Which we think is the important thing, is that we're not just having these conversations with our students, right, to gain awareness. Like everything, we want them to act on the information. In fact, the end of unit assignment in Unit 2 is to create their own speech about a call to social action. So I'm seeing a lot of comments in the text about getting more information about how to order the book in Top Hat. So what I will assure everyone is I will have Susan Moore, our beloved tech person, make sure that everybody gets a follow-up with the link to the page on our website that shows you the ISBNs for ordering. We will also make sure someone reaches out about what's involved with Top Hat. This should be a very easy adoption where Top Hat basically means you have to create a professor account to assign the book, but then your courses will get populated with the reader. And we really do recommend this format because, as you can see, it has so much to offer in allowing you to customize the text, use the readings you want, embed your own activities and assignments. So that is definitely the format we've had in mind when building the text, but we so appreciate all of you joining us today. I am going to take all of your delicious comments from the comment stream and start shaping our next meeting with Vershawn. And you can look forward to seeing invites for those. And we really appreciate you being part of this conversation today. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. And thank you, Vershawn. We so appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And Lindsay and everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.